and O'Neill from First Feasa here. Hope you're all well. It's the 31st of October, Halloween in English, Oiche Shamhna or Samhain in Irish, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk to you about in this video, about Halloween, about its origins in the Gaelic festival of Samhain, and what we know about it, looking at the ancient texts, etc. So, enjoy the video. Today is Halloween, Oiche Shamhna Oscuelga. Originating in Ireland and brought to America, Halloween has now become something international, something far different from what it was originally. Speculation about the origins of Halloween or Samhain have also become very popular. It's common to see people saying that it was an ancient Celtic festival, the Celtic New Year, or that the Celts believed that the veil between worlds was thin at this time. However, this is usually presented as an assertion, not speculation. Is there any truth in this, and in other wilder beliefs about Halloween? What do we actually know about the origins of Samhain? When was it actually celebrated, and how? Is it really Celtic? It's better to start to answer these questions by busting a few myths, and saying what Samhain was not. First, it was not a time when the veil between worlds was thin. I'll be a little controversial here. The idea of a veil between the other world and this one is a Victorian invention. More specifically, it is a result of interest in the occult. This involved taking something like the so-called Veil of Isis and throwing it into the Irish context. Victorians are responsible for messing up much Irish mythology. This idea about Halloween is one of the biggest messes. Indeed, the idea of the veil is now widely used. In Gaelic mythology, there are many otherworlds, as I'll talk about below. While Samhain was a time when it was easier to move from otherworlds, the Gaelic Irish, did not have a concept of a veil between worlds, as their concept of this world and the many other worlds was much more intricate. Indeed, they often overlapped or intertwined, as can be seen in the various tales involving Fionn McCool, where the sea in which the Tuatha Dé Danann lived could often be visited. At Samhain, it was easier to move between worlds or realms, but there was no idea of a veil between worlds. Secondly, and again I'm being controversial, Samhain was not an ancient Celtic festival. It was Gaelic, commemorated in Ireland and parts of Scotland. It does not appear to have been of particular importance in Wales, Cornwall or Brittany, for example. Moreover, although there are references to it in many texts, we do not know how it was commemorated in the medieval period or earlier. This distinction between Gaelic and Celtic is important. While the Irish language is part of what is conveniently labelled as Celtic, along with Scots Gaelic, Manx, Welsh, Breton, etc., there were many political, social, religious and cultural differences between these groups. Indeed, the usefulness of Celtic as a historical label is doubtful, especially when it is something conceived and imposed on these peoples relatively recently. Samhain seems to have been an important festival in Gaelic Ireland and Scotland. However, within these countries it was celebrated or commemorated in different ways. While in some parts of Ireland there were special traditions for commemorating it, in others there were none. I think it is important to pay attention to these local differences. Another reason why the word Celtic is not very useful here. Now, let's move on to what Halloween or Samhain was in Gaelic Ireland. First, it is worth mentioning that we have no evidence about how it was celebrated before the modern era. All the traditions and ways in which it was celebrated in Ireland seem to originate in the modern period. In other words, after the destruction of Gaelic Ireland. However, I want to make some conjectures here and peer into the past. I think to understand what Samhain was, you need to understand what life was like in 500, 1000 or 2000 years ago. Gaelic Ireland was an agricultural society. In this society, the harvest was very important. Bringing in the harvest and preparing for winter would have been very time-consuming. These were vital tasks, ensuring that there was enough food for winter, essential in an agricultural society. It seems obvious that at the end of the harvest there would have been some sort of festival to celebrate having finished such hard work, and perhaps also marking the change of seasons. In Ireland in October and November, days are short and getting shorter. It is often cold and wet and sometimes stormy. It only seems natural that people would need some sort of festivities at this rather dark time. It also seems natural that when nights are getting longer and when winter is coming, many of these stories would have some sort of supernatural or spooky aspect. Samhain, to me and many scholars, seems to have started as a harvest festival. In many ways, it was an excuse to celebrate and to have a little fun. It was probably also a time for storytelling, and perhaps thinking about magic and supernatural beings, about otherworlds. Religion and ritual would also have come into it. To me, this is what Samhain was: a festival, a commemoration, an excuse to have fun, an excuse to tell scary stories. Obviously, over the centuries, its meaning would change. New stories would be told. Some would become myths, others would be forgotten. It's impossible to say with any certainty what the exact origins of Samhain were. Does it predate Christianity in Ireland? I think it might, though there is no exact evidence for this due to the nature of the sources. We can never know with certainty, only guess. Indeed, celebrating All Saints' Day on the 1st of November seems to have originated in Ireland. This is the All Hallows, from which Halloween, All Hallows Eve, gets its name. On the other hand, it's important to point out that the old Gaelic texts contain many references to Samhain. It was a special time and seems to have had a number of roles. One was a time for feasting and festivities, probably a reflection of the commemoration of the harvest mentioned above. Second, it was a time for telling stories and for doing great deeds. In many tales, especially in the Ulster cycle, important events happened during Samhain or during Samhain feasts. It was also a time of magic and supernatural events, as might be expected when stories are set during this time. Related to this, as Hannah MacAuliffe points out on the excellent episode on Samhain that has just come out on the Irish Medieval History podcast, many Irish kings, especially legendary ones, die on Samhain. She also points out that Samhain is mentioned in the well-known Dinacus. In this text is an important feast held by the king of Tara. The author of the text calls it the Easter of the pagans. However, it is only held every 7 years. Finally, Samhain was a time when it seemed to be easy to move from another world to this world, or between other worlds. This can be seen in many stories set at Samhain, when there are supernatural occurrences, when the world is dark and scary, and when Gaelic otherworlds appear much more than normal in this world. I should point out here that in the Gaelic imagination there were many other worlds. Some of these are well known. Tirna Nog is perhaps the most famous. Tecdun, the House of Don, is another one. Don was one of the sons of Mill, though some believe that he may have been a Gaelic god in the pre-Christian world. Tecdun is believed to be located on Bull Rock, a rocky island off the Beara Peninsula, which has a stunning natural tunnel through it. Dun is said to have died when the sons of Mill tried to reach Ireland, and Tecdun is a cairn raised over where he died. It is also where the souls of the dead gather. Indeed, to go to the House of Dun was a poetic way of saying someone had died in Gaelic Ireland. This may be one of the various unacknowledged Irish influences on Tolkien. I think his idea of the dead elves waiting in the halls of Mandros echoes this. Furthermore, according to the 10th century tale, Orna Fingain, Tecdun is where the souls of the dead gather, while O'Hogan, quotes an interesting phrase from medieval Gaelic poem, Rum dom hig, tis it illed ir barnacab. To me, to my house, you shall all come after your deaths. It should be asked here if these beliefs about Tectun are Christian or pagan. Perhaps they are both. Certainly, they fit in with both. When dealing with history, it is not always possible to make clear distinctions, as life is almost always confusing, contradictory, and anything but straightforward. To illustrate this, Donn is also the father of the first great Kerryman, Dermot O'Divna of Dermot agus Grania fame. In turn, Dermot was raised in fosterage by Angus MacOg, one of the most famous of the Tuatha Dé Danann. Furthermore, in some tales, Donn is the son or foster son of the Dagda, seen by many as a god. All of this highlights the intersection of Gaelic otherworlds with this world. However, the most common Gaelic otherworlds were the sea or the Sid. Initially, this word meant the mounds where the Oiche or the Tuatha Dé Danann lived. These were not the fairy forts of later folklore, as they were built and lived in by the Gaelic Irish. Rather, the sea seemed to have been mounds, often passage graves, built much before the Gaelic period, such as Brú na Bóinne, or to take a lesser-known example, see na Mán Fionn in Tipperary, mentioned in Cot Fionn Trá. In many texts, Samhain is a time when it was easy to move from a sea to this world, or indeed to move between two different seas. Each sea was a distinct otherworld. Ireland thus had many otherworlds, a multiverse perhaps, much before Marvel thought of the term. This plurality of otherworlds echoed the Gaelic political structure. It is worth mentioning another Gaelic otherworld here, or at least the entrance to one, Uaimh na Gát, the Cave of the Cats, which is within the Rathcrogan complex in Roscommon. This is strongly associated with Samhain in folklore and mythology. It also is associated with Queen Maeve, as an Olm stone here appears to contain the inscription Freach, son of Maeve. It is also known as Uaimh Cruachan or Sid Cruachan. And just to complicate things, some believe that it should be called Uaimh na Gát, the Cave of the Battles, not the Cave of the Cat. Samhain was thus a liminal time. It was a harvest festival when people celebrated and prepared for winter. But it was also a time of great deeds and stories and myths, and of magic. In these stories, kings often died for breaking a taboo. It was a time when it was possible to move between other worlds, especially between the sea. At least, this is what I believe Samhain is. We cannot know for certain. Indeed, while it is mentioned in many texts, we have no evidence about how it was actually celebrated, though it does seem to have involved a lot of feasting. Nor do we know that it was always commemorated on the 31st of October. History, archaeology, mythology, to an extent, present us with windows through which we can glimpse the past. However, it's like a puzzle, one in which we do not have all the pieces, or even a picture to copy. I believe that we need to content ourselves with these glimpses of the past, and accept we will never know everything. Samhain started as a harvest festival. In Ireland it was commemorated in many ways. Some places celebrated it a lot, others less so. Some of these have died out, some have changed. Until the 1990s, the word trick-or-treating was not really used in Ireland. Irish and Scottish immigrants brought Halloween to the New World. There in the 20th century, it fell on fertile ground and was transformed. Now it has become international. It is important to remember how it began and what it meant. Change is a fundamental part of human life. Everything changes, including history, mythology, religion, rituals, and festivals. Samhain has become, or given way to Halloween, and recently has been reborn as a so-called ancient Celtic festival, or even as a strange period that plays a role in horror movies. Nowadays, Halloween has little to do with the commemoration of Samhain in Gaelic Ireland. Undoubtedly, it will change again in the future. Nonetheless, it is worth digging into the history to discover its origins and ensure they are remembered. Gurev Mahagrev, thanks for watching. I will leave some reading suggestions in the notes, and I would highly recommend a new episode on Samhain in the Irish Medieval History podcast. Please click like, leave a comment, subscribe. It really helps. And if you can help me more, my Buy Me a Coffee account is in the notes. Slán.